Hello and welcome to this special podcast episode brought to you by the Treasury Today group. I'm Sophie Jackson, Joint Publisher and Head of Strategic Content. This episode takes a look at our recent Women in Treasury London Forum, which took place in September this year. As with all our events in 2020, the forum was moved to a digital delivery, and this allowed us to have panellists joining us from across the EMEA region. Joining us on the day were Tian Song, Senior Treasury Manager at Baker Hughes, Helena Bernard, Head of Treasury at General Motors Middle East Operations in Dubai, Diane Reyes, Group General Manager, Global Head of Liquidity and Cash Management at HSBC, and Kim Hochfeld, Senior Managing Director, Global Head of Cash at State Street Global Advisors. Over the course of the day, we had live polling of the audience and an interactive question and answer session. Here's a sneak peek at just some of the highlights from the day. Tian, I mentioned, kudos, hats off to you for what you've done so far. I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit about how you've experienced working in different cultures and languages and whether there's been any learning curves in that. I'm sure there's been a lot.
My first international assignment is during my graduate program, and that was an assignment in Atlanta with GE Energy Group. So at that time, I got lucky because I had a manager who was originally Chinese and he's familiar with American living. So he was able to help me to combine the cultural heat, alert me of potential situations I might face, and help me to explain specific things that I might not know from that cultural content. So my first advice is that if you are moving to a new country, to a new language, find someone you can relate to and you can trust on. So the person can help you to gradually adapt to the local, the new environment. I think that definitely has helped me. Another advice from that experience, if I look back, is that, I was also lucky because that job is not overly challenging, which has helped me a lot because if I have to deal with a new living situation, figure out a new home, figure out how to live there, get a car, get to learn a new language, learn new people, and also having a huge challenging a job working 12 hours a day, it's not going to be possible. So my advice is that if it's first time you are considering moving abroad for an international assignment, might be just don't take all the challenge at one time. Maybe take a few things at a time and gradually move to the ultimate situation. So that was my first 6 months. And then the real challenge started when I moved on to the corporate audit staff program, the more intense program. And in that program, my first assignment is with GE Capital divestiture. So that's a lot more technical and a lot time pressure. I have a British manager and an Italian a senior manager, which made it really hard for me because first of all, I don't know those terms in the a capital portfolio and the divestiture a space. So I'm getting a job challenge. In the meanwhile, the British accent and the Italian accent definitely made it harder. So I can imagine times when we were in a telepresence with the group CEO, CFO, and then there is a big population listening in, and I just fall asleep simply because I cannot follow. So that period, that's a 4 months period where my performance professionally is actually being impacted because I wasn't able to, first of all, understand what everything. Second of all, I cannot articulate myself in a professional content. So that period, it's really challenging. And my advice is just deal with it. Just don't panic because everybody actually understand you will have such challenge. Just speak up about the challenge you might face and people will help you. At least they will understand you are dealing with that situation and they will be a little more tolerant. It's not going to be 100% tolerance of all your mistakes, but you should be making your reasonably good effort, right? So yeah, that's my second phase. Then my third phase is that I get used to the day-to-day. I have a good professional competence. My business English improved a lot. I know how everything works. So my professional delivery is being recognized. However, that phase, my challenge has then becomes how I build a professional relationship with my colleagues outside of the task itself. Because at that moment, like you are not talking about some like a task you want to achieve where you know the content, you know the terms. You are talking about something outside of work. For example, you talk about American singers, like who is a classic singer, country singer. I will be like, wait, who are those people that like people are talking about? Or people talk about sports or like the drink games. There are a lot of the drink games in the US. I just have no idea what people are talking about. So I found at that phase, my challenge is really that how I build my network beyond like the specific tasks. So my experience during that period is that, again, it's not going to achieve in one day because you gradually get involved in what everybody is like basically occurring in their everyday life and trying to get familiar with them. So the advice is really not to be afraid of getting along with people who have a different lifestyle. Don't always hang out with people from your own cultural background. Like that's my observation in the UK. A lot of the Chinese students, they only hang out with other Chinese students. So the result is that, well, they are not really going to get to a stage where they can build connection with the locals. So that's my third stage. Then my last stage is really, well, okay, I can build relationship with my colleagues. I can get work done. I can live comfortably. However, how I expand my network beyond like your colleagues or like other team members or like the other companies you are working with, going beyond this, like after work, who are you going to hang out with? I'm still trying to like figure the answer for this one. So any advices, I'm happy to hear.
Kim's also had to work in another language. I mean, not quite as drastically different, but Kim's worked in French. And I think encountering that feeling is difficult and challenging. What have you learned about how this plays into the inclusion side of things, working in different cultures, working in different languages, being on the back foot, so to speak?
I would answer this question by saying, Sophie, that I actually think it's been an absolute privilege to be an outsider in many contexts. So I've been a foreigner in the UK for the last 27 years. As you alluded to, I worked for about 5 years in a completely francophone environment. So I was the only English speaker around the table. And I've been a woman in a typically male-dominated industry for my entire career. And what it's given me, it's challenged me and inspired me in a way that I would never have believed, being an outsider. You have to work harder to build connections, to relate to people. But what it gives you too is it also incentivizes you and inspires you to challenge your own preconceptions, to take a step back and look at what you might have taken for granted or what are your baseline assumptions about something, because people are approaching them so differently. So I found it hugely inspiring, a huge growth experience, being forced to work in cultures that have been different to my own. And I think what it's done for me is, I hope it's made me a better listener. And I think if you're a better listener because you are taking on board other people's opinions, suggestions, thoughts, and ideas, it's going to make you a better decision maker. And it's also going to make you a much more inclusive leader. So, this goes back to the comments that Diane made and that I echoed around international experience. Being an outsider in a different culture forces you to stop, to appreciate different cultures, different viewpoints, and hopefully think more inclusively and embrace diversity rather than resisting it.
Diane, I want to kick off with you again. What advice would you offer to people who are struggling to get the recognition that they want during this time? There's a lack of physical interaction. There's a lack of ability to kind of grab people and make them notice you. So what can we do during this time to develop our presence, develop our skill sets, and get noticed?
So I guess I'll make a comment coming off of something Kim said about the great equalizer. I do think remote working and Zoom is a leveler, if you will. It doesn't matter your status, right? Everybody's kind of equal, and we see so much about the person, whether you mention your cat or your dog or your child running in the background, or even a spouse, or some people have a kitchen behind them, whatever it might be. It's actually kind of creates a more normal, comfortable, open opportunity to talk. Now, I think that there are some things that people can think about in this kind of context to be noticed. If you're not on a Zoom call, I guess you don't have that opportunity to have it to be the great equalizer. But I do think that you can find ways to get on the Zoom call. And I think one of the things that we're doing is examining ourselves to say, how many coffee chats, virtual coffee chats that you had, and are you having them with the same people you always had? Do you have only those coffee chats with men or women? And what type of ethnic minorities? Who do you invite to your staff meetings? And have you invited any of the Black community lately? And can you have them come periodically to keep you honest and test their input? So I think that there are things you can do to get on those calls. I was on a call literally this morning where our CEO has talked about what our 2025 goals to double our senior leaders, Black leaders. And two have raised their hand and said, look, can I do a short-term assignment with you for 6 months? I'm really passionate about it and I want to help you get this right. So there's a lot of ways for people of all genders and diversity and inclusion aspects to participate if they're not on the Zoom calls. Volunteering, I mentioned earlier. But if you are on them, you want to get noticed and you feel like you're just new at it or not really getting airtime, I would say the first thing to do is to have an elevator pitch. And I know many of us won't be in elevators in the short term, but you can use that pitch verbally. What is it you want to be known for? How do you want to be branded? And what is it you want to say about yourself to others? And it doesn't have to be, I want to tell you I'm great and these are my leadership attributes. It's like, hey, I've been working on thus and such. I've accomplished and finished this project. Can I help you in that regard? Because no one else will know as much about what you've accomplished as what you know, because your boss has probably, a minimum of 7, if not 17 direct reports. So there's no way they can know everything that you've done, but definitely someone who's not your boss that you would see in the elevator, who you might want to work for later, that you'd see on the virtual Zoom screen, wouldn't know. So for you to be able to find a way to say, hey, George, I've done thus and such in the last week. You just mentioned something about that. I know I'm not in your department, but could you leverage my skill set, that sort of thing. So have your elevator speech and don't use it just to learn about the games with baseball or football or soccer or whatever, but use it in a business context. Don't talk about the weather. I think the other thing I would say is practice these points. And Sophie mentioned that earlier, where she has a group that practices how they're going to ask for an increase or something. You should practice just about everything until you get really comfortable with public speaking. And I know some people poo-poo it and say, oh, practice, I don't need to do that. But actually, all the great CEOs that you know have taken coaching and Toastmasters, and most of them practice 10 times before they give a major auditorium presentation. So there's nothing to be embarrassed about. I guess the second point I'd make, and I'll stop with that, is in this environment, it is easy to forget yourself. And so I would caution that and make sure you find time for yourself and to focus on your career development. And it's actually should be a time in which opportunities are open to you. Educational opportunities are open everywhere. Your company is not doing in-classroom training much anymore, so everything is online. And if you were in a department and you wouldn't take that training before, but you're very interested in that, you now can do it because it's available to all employees. It's quite a democratic process. So take some courses, whether it's a technical course or a new domain you want to be in, it doesn't matter. Just advance yourself and where you want. And then there's free non-course related to your companies that are out there. So one of the things I've done during those lunch sessions, and I only get 30 minutes, I've been able to join in podcasts, live podcasts that are being sponsored by Fortune. And this is something I could have never done at my office before because I wouldn't have that same scheduled period of time. And B, they weren't offering these during the lunch breaks before. So I am trying to make sure I'm conscious of what's happening in the broader community. What's the government in the area and all the states across the US doing? How are they collaborating with other countries? I wouldn't have had that time. So I encourage you all to do that and have a development plan. If your company offers a template or a form, don't get angry about it and think it's administrative. Just fill that thing out. It's as much for you as it is for your manager. It's a document for you to hold yourself accountable that you said you wanted to do something, and then you'll have to do it. But it's also a way to get your manager on the same page and they can help you achieve your development plan, whatever that may be. So I would just say, one, have that elevator pitch and practice it. Find ways to get onto the Zoom meetings, ask for help from other people, join as an observer, because most managers, if you ask, will do it. Second, focus on yourself and a development plan that's formal during this period. And I guess last, which I didn't sort of talk about, is if you feel you need it, find a mentor or a sponsor, be persistent and reach out to somebody you think would be ideal for you and explain to them why. They'll at least give you one meeting. And during that one meeting, if you practice well, you'll probably get your second meeting. So those would be some thoughts I have, Sophie.
Helene, I want to move to you. We talked a little bit earlier there about how everyone's experiencing the past 6 months, things that we're learning from it. But one of the other things we've talked about on and off throughout this conversation is strategic treasury, how things are changing for you in your role. How have you seen the role of a treasurer evolving, and how do you see it evolving even further now with the current situation that we're all in?
So a couple of things, in particular, over the past, I would say, decade, since the last global financial crisis, there has been so much more focus on treasury strategy, liquidity, cash management. That's one side of change. In many, I would say, multinational companies, have had much more sophisticated treasuries for a really long time. When it comes to some of the smaller companies or private local companies, treasury, I have witnessed, it has been years ago embedded in other finance function. It was part of accounting, it was part of overall picture, it was not as visible. Over the past 10 years, we see, in particular in the region where I am extremely much more focused on recruiting treasury professionals with broader experience, implementing systems, putting controls in place, automating treasury activities, as well as moving back office to shared service. We've seen that happening for banks as well as for corporates. That's one side. The other thing is treasurers had much more new requirements from when it comes to regulatory requirement, KYC, etc. So you need to really spend much more time to manage those activities. But most importantly, I think it's the overall banking industry and the technology that has evolved over the past decade with automation, digitization, new products, working capital management, different tools, more automated, the fintechs, etc. So it has been quite a lot. And Treasurer, it's become much more challenge of being on top, of being innovative, interacting with the outside world, getting the best products and practices brought to their own workplace to support the organizational to catch up with the outside technology, but also find the efficiency from risk management to cash visibility, reconciliation, etc. As well as in most companies, the projects usually, start evolving with business development, etc. So nowadays, if there is an ongoing discussion for various projects, Treasury has to be part of it at the very early stage to actually be part of the strategy. Funding is an important component. And there have been a lot of volatilities in the market and from the liquidity perspective. So I would say COVID overall experience, I think there is much more focus on counterparty risk management, overall risk management because everyone is sitting at home. So making sure the technology being used, it's all saved in safe environment, secured. There are in the region, there are still certain areas where the paper check is very common. Now with what has been happening, recently, I think there's a huge acceleration of moving away from paper to digitization, and banks are much more open to receive digital documents versus physical paperwork that has to. So all these things, it's actually, there's some benefit. At the same time, I look at it from the positive side because it's going to accelerate digitization and a different way of working. And I couldn't imagine myself being sitting at home and my team being in the office, and there's payments, there's so many projects, there's so many things. But what the technology does, and just I think probably most of you might know, within the region, voice, certain video were not that widely used unless you had a video conference, so it was not that popular. This is another benefit what we have now. We can talk, not necessarily video, but being able to share the documents, presentations, makes it much more efficient, whereas prior to I would say, pandemic, it was much more common to sit in a meeting room and pop up charts of presentations and talk about it. What I also found that we keep meeting much shorter if it's online. Maybe because we have so many more other meetings that we probably didn't have squeeze in, but people come prepared. They're much more efficient because they want to achieve the result and move on.
Kim and I, we've spoken about the support for Black Lives Matter that's going on across the world. This is provoking a conversation for all of us around racial equity, which is long overdue. And what do you think we can learn from this? What do we do? How do we start to push for racial equity in our professions? And how can we help? How can we be part of a solution and not part of a problem?
So I'm going to answer this question from two angles. The first from the corporate angle and the second from a personal angle. So from a corporate perspective, I'm very proud that State Street Global Advisors has been a long-standing champion of diversity through our role as an asset steward. So we are broadening that focus now to include not just gender diversity, but also racial and ethnic diversity. The fundamental tenet of our whole activist program is that the best long-term driver of value in the companies that we own is having a strong, independent, and effective board. And the best way to achieve that, according to all the research, is to have a diverse group of individuals on that board. So we are widening our focus on diversity, not just to include gender, but also on racial and ethnic grounds. And we are asking all the companies that we own to publicly publish their strategy around racial and ethnic diversity. They need to give us their goals, their strategies, and the risks of not pursuing a diverse strategy on that front. And the key requirement to that is that it is publicly disclosed to all their underlying shareholders. So we've seen huge results from our gender push along these lines. We hope we will see as an encouraging response from the companies that we own along racial and ethnic lines. So that's what we can do on a corporate level. I think on a personal level, as you say, we as women have all been in the position where we are in the minority. And I would say we should use that example to appreciate and to try and understand the position that our Black colleagues are in as a very much more a minority than we've ever been, with a lot more struggle than perhaps women have had. So I always think of the line that our State Street COO actually said, because a comment he made really resonated with me. He said, simply because we're innocent bystanders doesn't mean we can simply stand by. And I think that encapsulates what we can do as individuals. We need to embrace this. We need to be talking about it. We need to be conscious of all the obstacles in the way of our Black colleagues, our Black female colleagues, and try and help make that dialogue an open dialogue. It's an open issue, and start trying to address those problems. So I think it's the start of a very important journey that we need to make.
I guess I'll add one small thing. I think Kim had said a lot of it, the idea of publishing and having goals. And as I mentioned earlier, our CEO has done that, but I think that's not enough. I think we need to cascade those down to the different departments in the firm, and each department has to internalize where they're going with concrete actions that are perhaps more relevant in their department than maybe in another. So I think the idea of, okay, the CEO does it, is just the beginning. They've given us the room and the direction of travel that we need to go in, but now we have to also own it. And so I would just say, make sure your own department that you're leading, it could be 10 people, it could be 100, it could be 1,000, whatever, it doesn't matter. They need to own this as well. That's how it's going to get real.
I want to thank our panellists Tian Song, Diane, Helena and Kim for being part of this important conversation. And also a big thank you to our guest stars Esen Bastug, Mariana Policarati and Helen Hamby for their great questions and for joining us. And finally, our attendees and our panel sponsors, HSBC and State Street Global Advisors. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcast from to hear more of our audio content. Thank you very much.